only. I'd be okay if they came in a secret lair. I'd buy it.
Alrighty, we've begun the recording.
So do we want to go around the table and introduce ourselves?
Uh, I suppose I should start. Uh, I'm Wash. I'm the Jhoira primer author who keeps track of the list, and yeah, not too much to say.
I'm Durful. I keep track of my own version of Jhoira's deck, very closely based off of Wash's, and I keep track of the transmogrification station, the Poly Tyrant variant.
Nate.
I think he said he stepped away for a sec.
Oh, gotcha. He was the only one who didn't have a mute symbol next to his name. Dark,
What's up?
you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Dark. I maintain my own version of the list, and I just generally exist to talk some shit around the Discord.
Okay, I'm back.
If we can depend on anyone for a grim outlook on a card, it's usually Dark.
Yeah.
My hot takes are usually pretty depressing and also pretty bad, yes.
All I'm saying is if Lotus Petal was unbanned, we probably wouldn't run it anyway.
You mean Black Lotus?
Black
Or
Lotus.
yeah, sorry, yep.
Why? Because we can do better.
Yeah. I don't know. Putting Artificer's Intuition in this deck sounds like fun. Nate, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Discord user Nate the Great. Thank y'all for coming.
Alrighty. So where do we want to begin? Do we want to begin at the spreadsheet? Do we want to begin at the PowerPoint? Do we want to begin with some basic Jhoira knowledge?
Let's start with your PowerPoint. Or I should say
PowerPoint.
Nate's PowerPoint.
No worries.
Well, let's go ahead and see how this works.
So yeah, for anyone that doesn't know, Jhoira is a legendary creature for 4 mana that whenever you cast a historic spell, you draw a card. That, of course, involves artifacts, legendaries, sagas.
And that's basically what we're taking advantage of in this deck. We're just playing a lot of historic spells, mostly artifacts, and drawing more cards than anyone else at the table, hopefully. So let's see. I'm thinking we should start with just general Jhoira knowledge, just because this is kind of going over individual cards. So, if you know anything about artifacts, it's that they're usually pretty cheap and that they are very versatile. Think about all the fast mana that basically every deck in cEDH plays. Chrome Mox, Jeweled Lotus, Lotus Petal, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring. All those cards are already great, and in our deck they just become even better because you draw cards off them. And we're just taking advantage of that. Adding in cards like Ethereum Sculptor to make them even cheaper. Cards like Riddlesmith to draw extra cards, get deeper down in your deck, find more, and then just keep going and going and going until we eventually hit one of our combos. Hopefully, if your table doesn't scoop first. You'll find your combo and hopefully be able to end the game from there pretty quickly. Our main combos are Mystic Forge plus Sensei's Top, plus the cost reducer. Then we have the good old dramatic and isochron scepter, also known as IsoRev, where we get to untap all our artifacts that we're playing anyway to make mana, and then tap again, tap again, tap again, making infinite. The next line that we have is our Words of Wind loops, which are a bit complicated. We'll kind of get into them more later. But basically, the main idea is you pay one, and the next time you draw a card, each player returns a permanent they control to their hand. This is basically the only way to consistently be able to bounce artifacts to your hand, because it's the only one that says permanent outside of 8 mana cards. And then lastly, we're on Underworld Breach lines, which, if you're familiar with cEDH, you know an Underworld Breach line when you see it. You play Breach, you play Brain Freeze, and you usually just win. Anything anyone want to say?
Nope, I agree with all that.
So from there, we move to a general idea of the deck. The idea of the deck, obviously, as we were talking about earlier, is playing a whole bunch of cards and drawing a whole bunch of cards and eventually getting to your win. Of course, we have cards that assist us with that. Riddlesmith, the Reality Chip, Bergie, Mystic Forge, all these cards, they help in our combos, but they also help draw us extra cards. Sensei's Divining Top is the main one that we're going to be using. As long as you have a cost reducer on board, it will just draw you 2 cards every time you would normally draw 1 card. The idea is just that you play Sensei's Top, drawing a card off it. You tap the top, putting it back on top of your library, drawing an additional card, and then you'll play a different artifact from your hand. Redraw the top, and you've just gone +2 because now you get to replay the top again. Our other ones are a little less powerful, but are less dependent on us having a cost reducer on board. The main one is going to be Riddlesmith and Dragon Rage Channeler. Both of those basically just let you cycle through cards more and more and more as you're going down deeper into your deck. Riddlesmith's discarding a card is basically not a downside because you're just discarding cards you're not going to play anyway. Dragon Rage Channeler is a little weaker since you're having to look at the top, and if you decide you want to keep it there, you don't get to see an additional card. However, it's off of any non-creature spell instead of just artifacts, which is useful because you're going to be playing a tutor here and there. You're going to be wanting to wheel sometimes, and you're obviously going to need to be protecting your board from things like spot removal, from people trying to counterspell, whatever you're trying to win the game with. So getting a little deeper in your deck for each of those is going to be very useful. Then the slightly weaker ones are going to be the Reality Chip and Mystic Forge. These are going to let you cast cards off the top of your library, usually artifacts, which will get you deeper in your deck, but will also, if there's not an artifact on top, then it's not actually getting you anywhere. You need to be able to get deep enough into your deck to find an artifact that you can play off the top and get that free value. And sometimes you end up accidentally drawing them because you're doing something else on board, which is drawing you additional cards, so you're not actually getting the full value from your Mystic Forge or Reality Chip. However, they're still very good cards for this deck. They combo out very easily with top, um, and they still provide you that advantage that you're looking for. If you move down to the rocks, you obviously know that most of the spells that we're playing in here are either drawing us additional cards or getting us additional mana. Think things like Mox Diamond, Mox Amber, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring. They're getting you those additional cards, but they're actually helping you keep that storm going. Because you're making mana, which will allow you to play more cards later. Obviously, certain cards are going to be better at this than others. I'll pick a Mana Crypt over a Soul Ring any day, but that doesn't mean that they're not both excellent cards that you want to be playing. Anything that goes mana positive is basically your best friend in this deck. You're wanting to just keep the storm going for as long as possible until you eventually get down to either a tutor to be a tutor for your combo or just naturally drawing into that combo. That's the easiest way that we usually win our games, is by just naturally drawing into those combo pieces. Yeah, I mean, anything y'all want to say about that? Anything
No,
you'd like
yeah.
to
So
add?
overall, the Jhoira deck with the different cards that we have early game, we want to establish just a lot of mana dominance with these early fast mana rocks that everyone knows about through cEDH. If you're not familiar with them, they're basically 0, maybe 1 cost mana rocks, but usually 0 that generate us mana. So they're mana positive in nature. The term mana positive will be used throughout the video for anyone watching later on. That just means that it makes more mana than it costs to play. We make that mana positive interaction, eventually playing Jhoira out much earlier than expected, using that draw engine to establish some draw, and then once we get a combo ready, that's when we're able to initiate the end game.
Aside from that, we play pretty basic, pretty lean interaction package just to keep ourselves protected from our opponents trying to stop us from storming off. Cards like Dispel, Flusterstorm, Mental Misstep, Swan Song, all great cards for keeping yourself protected. Deflecting Swap, Fierce Guardianship, ridiculously powerful. There's some cards in the deck that are going to be quick bursts of card draw or mana, depending on the card. So cards like Paradoxical Outcome usually draw you 10 plus cards. Hercule's Recall and Retract are both kind of in that similar vein. They're cheaper, but they're not quite as powerful as Paradoxical Outcome. Cards like Jessica's Will, where a lot of times it'll make you 5, 6, 7 mana, as well as getting you 3 additional cards. A card like Urza, it enters and it just turns anything that's not already making mana into something that's making mana. So he usually refunds himself pretty quickly and just keeps making mana the whole time. Same with Bergie, absolutely busted. Makes an insane amount of mana every time that you just start storming with her on board. And of course, the wheels are the most cut and dry. You're paying 3 mana, you're getting 7 cards most of the time, which is an insane rate for any format, uh, including cEDH.
Can I
Well,
jump in with a question?
Yeah.
So, seeing as how Jhoira is pretty much needed to win, what is your typical counterspell strategy?
So generally, I like to keep one or two blue mana open while I'm storming, if at all possible. Just because your opponents will see that, and oftentimes they will sit there and wait for you to either use it or try to go for something. Um, if you aren't able to if you aren't able to win on your turn and you don't think that you'll be able to get there if you use up all your mana, a lot of times it's a good idea to just hold one or two mana open up at the end of your turn to show your opponents that you're planning to interact and you want to get back to your turn. Which of course will mean that they want to interact with you, but they'll usually wait until the end step, either before their turn or before your turn, just to kind of scope out everything. You don't want to just immediately blow your interaction on any commander, including ours, if someone else is going to do something even worse immediately after. So just holding open the mana to protect your stuff is the main thing. It's very hard. Trust me. You always want to go. Oh, but if I just use one more, I can get there. But you have to know when to be greedy, and you have to know when to just let your opponents get their turn.
typically, as far as interaction goes, I treat mine on unless it targets something that's very vital to my strategy or is going to end the game. I'll usually just tend to pass and make it someone else's problem. Especially right now when there's more mid-range, more stacksy decks at the table in the meta. But I find that we don't really have to police. We're not really looking to police the board that much in our deck because we're so focused on storming off as quickly as we can. That a lot of times the more mid-range decks don't have time to get their game plans off.
Right. You want to be proactive enough to keep the mid-range decks from getting to the mid to the late game, where they're their strongest. But you don't want to commit so hard that you're trying to outpace the Turbo Nas decks and stuff like that, because those decks, even for a deck like this, they're just too fast. They're gonna outrace you almost every time, and you need to know how to adapt to those different spots in your game.
And I think this one cool thing about our deck is because we know we can't outrace an Adnaz deck, and typically whenever a pod sees an Adnaz deck, they're the ones that they focus on first, which puts us kind of in a prime position to be that second person to go off or to go for a win, and it's always a little bit easier and more reassuring for me to go off after someone has just stopped someone else's attempt,
Right.
because you're usually a little bit safer with them not having everything to exactly stop you from going off.
Mm-hmm.
I would also make a point that you mentioned retract and Hercule's Recall. Although they might be weaker than Paradoxical Outcome on like their straight card velocity and how much they draw you, since they're cheaper to cast, I tend to see them both operate as card draw and a ritual, and it's like a pseudo ritual effect, because a lot of times you have so many mana rocks out that you can float mana and end up coming out mana positive on a storm turn as well.
Right, absolutely. Those cards, because they're so much cheaper than Paradoxical Outcome, a single blue or 2 mana, you can tap one rock and tap the rest of them, just floating that mana, bounce all your artifacts to hand, play your 1 or 2 cost reducers, and then just play everything else back onto the board and just make mana off of all of those. Especially if you have Bergie on board, then it just becomes ridiculous. And of course, you're drawing cards off of every single one of those that enters. Sometimes more than that if you have like a Riddlesmith or obviously Top again. You want to hold spot removal unless something's actively stopping you from winning the game or is attempting a win. So a card like Resculpt, unless someone's going to, unless someone's resolved like a Null Rod or a Trinosphere, you're generally going to hold on to that until as late as you can. You want to be sandbagging these removal cards until you're trying to go off, because you don't want an opponent to try to take advantage of the fact that you just removed their other opponent's stacks piece or problematic card. Think like Draneth Magistrate, any Rule of Law effect if you have a bounce spell for that, or if it's a creature like Archon of Emeria. Anything like that, you just want to hold those things until as late as you can, right before you try going off. In general, there are going to be exceptions to everything. Every rule that we say is just a rule of thumb. You're not just playing these games in a vacuum. You're playing them with other people, and you're playing them in the moment. And you're always going to have to be looking around and trying to figure out when's the best time to do this. You want to be holding it until the last second, but sometimes maybe the person is about to untap and you need that piece gone now, or whenever they untap they're going to have counter magic up for it, so you need to do it right then and there. It all just depends on what's going on. But that's general theory for how to play this deck. You can kind of mold it to however you want to play. Obviously, this deck is always going to lean towards being a faster deck, a combo-based deck where you're drawing a lot of cards and trying to end the game that way. But there's hundreds of ways you could build this deck and it still be considered competitive. Hundreds of different cards you could slot in and out, depending on what's going on, all that stuff. The primer is just meant to be, or the primer list is just meant to be there as a base. It's meant to be generally good, as good as it can be in as many contexts as it can be, without sacrificing too much power, too much speed, anything like that. But if in your specific meta you find maybe there's a bit more stacks, but it takes a little longer to get on board, maybe you try pressing that gas pedal harder to get there before the stacks are able to stop you. Or maybe you switch to a more mid-range kind of plan. Playing more card advantage engines, just getting more resources than those other decks are, and then just stockpiling until you're able to win the game. But that's all going to be based on your specific meta. I believe we're probably ready to hop over into the uh, PowerPoint if y'all are.
PowerPoint.
Can everyone
Always
see the
excited
PowerPoint
for
all right?
PowerPoint.
What's that?
Yeah, I can see good.
Everyone seeing it fine? Sweet. So,
So far, so good.
first thing we're going to be going over in this is going to be the artifacts. They're the lifeblood of this deck. They're going to be the thing that propels you forward all the time. Every time you see an artifact, you're going to be like, oh, best card in my deck. Even if it's not. So we'll run through the main ones in the list, and then we can run back through afterwards. So Aether Spellbomb, there's also Pyrite Spellbomb in this deck. The main things about these is that they're just cheap interaction, or they can be card draw. They're nice and versatile. They just do multiple things, which is a lot better than a lot of artifacts, which just make mana or just anything else really. They mostly make mana. Speaking of mana, Arcane Signet. All of the 2 mana rocks are either versatile in some way or make colored mana, and come in untapped. Those are the 2 main things you're looking for. Is that they either do something else or they're coming in untapped and make colored mana. Colorless mana is obviously good for the deck, but you want colored mana more often than you want colorless mana, because this is a very low to the ground list, and just a natural thing of being low to the ground is that you're going to have more pips than something with a higher CMC on average. Did I put these in?
I do not have those in mine.
I might be looking at the wrong one then. Give me a second.
I will
We are
say,
currently experiencing technical difficulties. Please bear with us just one moment.
Yes, here we go. My bad, guys.
I think I made you one with the sideboard in the presentation as well.
That might have been what I
That
was
was
looking at. We'll go through that one later.
fooled
Yeah.
you.
Dumb.
So, Chrome Mox, kind of the, I wouldn't say the poster child, but like the younger sibling to fast mana at 0. You lose a little bit in card advantage, but you get that back in mana immediately, and you get it every single turn after that, which is obviously extremely good. Being at 0 mana, you just play it for free. You immediately get a mana. And it just helps you continue storming. With Jhoira on board, obviously you draw an additional card, which that's both sides of the storm. The two main things for a storm are going to be having cards and having mana. So you want cards. Your commander's helping you on the card side. So you want the cards that you're playing to be helping you on the mana side. Obviously, there are some limitations to Jhoira's ability to draw you cards. You only get 1 per artifact, and it's not the easiest thing to bounce all your artifacts. There's only a certain amount of those in your deck, and even when you do draw them, sometimes you might not have enough artifacts. So you really want your artifacts to be doing stuff. Generally getting you more mana. We'll see later there are some that get you additional cards, and those ones are obviously very good in their own right. But you need mana and you need card draw to be able to storm. Otherwise, you're just going to fizzle out and not be able to get anywhere. Speaking of mana, the cost reducers are one of the best ways to make things that wouldn't be mana positive, mana positive. So all of your 2 mana rocks that make a mana, they instantly become mana neutral, which means they make the same amount of mana that it costs to play them, which is basically just free cantripping at that point. And if you have a second one down, then you're going to be drawing additional card. You're going to be getting additional mana, I should say, for those ones. While other cards like your Soul Ring is going to suddenly be a Mana Crypt. Your Mana Volt.
Without bolting.
What's that?
So your Soul Ring is your mana crypt without the fun bolt every turn.
Oh yeah, every other turn, but.
For you, maybe.
Unless you're most of us, I suppose. Well, here's the thing: you just don't play any additional turns.
That is usually the goal.
Just end it right there. You never have to worry about getting bolted. But no, cost reducers hugely help with the mana problem of the storm, because there's only so many cards that are mana positive. So you need other cards that are going to make the other cards that are already good better. Codex Shredder, this is another versatile artifact. It just taps to mill a card, very cheap, it's only 1 mana. It can also get you stuff back, but at 5 mana, that's not super relevant. The main things about this card that you're looking at is the fact that it mills a card, so it is able to, you're able to just play it, and then it just sit there and turn off top deck tutors. Most of the time, unless you're playing against like Grist, I guess. But you're turning off top deck tutors, and it becomes a win condition. Depending on which combo you decide to do, you can win with this with ISO Rev, which is a pretty obvious combo. You can also do it with Words of Wind, which is a little bit harder to do, but still completely possible. For that, all you need is you either need infinite mana, or you need a cost reducer on board, and then either Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Mana Volt, or there's another one. Just something that produces more than 2 or more mana. And then you're able to infinitely recast this and mill everyone out. Conjurer's Bauble, this is one of the cards that is drawing us additional cards. One of the artifacts that's drawing us additional cards, I should say. Being at 1 mana and having the word draw card on it is, or the sentence draw card on it is exactly what this kind of deck wants. It wants extremely cheap things that get us additional cards, so that we can get further along, because Jhoira is only drawing you 1 card per artifact, and that's good. That's the lifeblood of this deck, but you're going to need more than just that. We're only playing around a third of the deck as historics. There's just too many good cards in cEDH not to be doing that. So you need ways to work around the fact that you're not playing 70 artifacts in your deck. Everflowing Chalice, this is one of the cards that it's a mana rock if you have two cost reducers down, or the rest of the time it's just a 0 drop that's free. You draw an additional card off it. It's a little bit on the weaker side, but obviously it's hard to go wrong with something that's just 0 mana and draws you a card. or multiple cards depending on what your board state's looking like. Experimental Synthesizer. This is another card that gets you additional cards, another artifact that gets you additional cards. Just being able to play it for 1 mana and then draw 2 cards, impulse drawing one of them. It's just 1 mana, draw an additional card on top of the card that you're already drawing. It also has some extra synergies with cards like all your bounce spells. I suppose you could probably do something with Breach if you wanted to. But it just draws a lot. It helps you draw a lot more cards. Felwar Stone makes mana. Grim Monolith, mana positive. 2 mana for 3 mana. Once you start having cost reducers on board, that becomes a mana vault, and then ridiculous 0 mana for 3 mana. You're not usually untapping it. We don't have anything in the deck right now that's making full use of the fact that it's that you could combo with it. Like, we're not playing Copy Artifact or anything like that. The main reason for that is just that infinite mana doesn't usually immediately equate to a win in this deck. Jhoira's not an infinite mana outlet. We don't have a lot of infinite mana outlets in the deck outside of Urza and Words of Wind, technically. But aside from those, you're not really winning the game with infinite mana. You're winning the game with other combos, things that draw you your entire library. Helm of Awakening, probably the best reducer in our entire deck. Makes everything cost 1 less. The main idea with this card is that you don't pass the turn with it on the board. Whenever you play it, you better be planning to win that turn. Because if not, your opponents are gonna abuse this as much as they can. And obviously you're set up to abuse it better than they are, but that doesn't mean that giving all your opponents such insane mana advantage is a good idea. Isochron Scepter, one of our combo pieces, can also do some more toxic things, putting a bounce spell on it, putting a counter spell on it, stuff like that. Very versatile card. Also lets you win the game if you have a copy spell. If you have no other way to win the game, you can copy your second version, or you can copy this and on your second version put on Swan Song, and then from there you're able to make infinite birds, which is a way to win the game if you have somehow been locked out of winning the game other ways. Izzet Signet, 2 mana, makes mana. Jeweled Amulet, this is kind of more of like a storage card. It's a little bit weird. The 0 drops are kind of weird in this deck, because they're 0 mana, so they're going to draw you a card. They're always a cantrip, as long as you have Jhoira on board. And if they have some useful effect after that, then they're usually considered for the deck. This is a useful effect, but it's not broken or anything like that. It's just you get to save a mana for a later turn if you end up not using it. Useful, not broken, not crazy powerful, but useful. Jeweled Lotus, complete other side of the coin. Insane card for 0 mana. Turn 1 Jhoira has never been easier since this card was printed. It's insane how busted this card is, and even when you're not playing Jhoira off it, it just draws a card. Like, that's good. LED, kind of the I would say ugly stepsister, but like came out beforehand, so I don't know. Lion's Eye Diamond is an interesting card, to say the least. 0 mana, discarding your hand for 3 mana sounds bad on paper, but in practice you can do some pretty broken stuff with it. You can put it on the board, play a wheel, crack it before the wheel resolves, and just have 3 mana for your extra cards that you're drawing. You can also do that with like your bounce spells if you're feeling risky, where you put this on board, play a bounce spell, crack it in response, bounce all your artifacts to hand, but you better be very sure that your opponents don't have anything else to interact with you after that, because otherwise you can just get completely blown out of the water. But the main thing you're using LED for is going to be your Underworld Breach loops. When you're playing Underworld Breach, it doesn't matter if you don't have a hand, because your entire graveyard's your hand. So LED just becomes Black Lotus. Kind of better than Black Lotus, because it doesn't need to tap, so you can tap it to something like Urza, and then sacrifice it, which is interesting. But yeah, very odd card, very good card in the right contexts. Lotus Petal, 0 mana, sack it, make a mana. Just makes mana. It's also it can also be a stand-in for LED while you're doing Underworld Breach. It's a little bit more involved when you do it that way, but still works nonetheless. Mana Crypt. This is probably the poster child for cEDH in general. Like if EDH is Soul Ring, then Mana Crypt is cEDH, just because Mana Crypt is just better Soul Ring. 99% of the time, it's just better Soul Ring. The 3 damage so rarely ever matters, unless you're playing in like heavy stacks. But if you're playing heavy stacks, then Jhoira might not be the deck for you. I hate to say it. Mana Vault. This actually is as mana positive as Mana Crypt, but significantly worse. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's 1 mana instead of 0 mana, and 1 mana is a lot more than 0. You wouldn't think that the difference between 0 and 1 would be a lot, but especially in decks like this, something being 1 mana versus something being 0 mana can ruin your life. Mox Amber, 0 for 0 mana, draw a card, make a mana. Very good card, does everything we want it to do. Mox Diamond, same thing. You have to discard a land, or else it doesn't enter. But the fun thing about that is that you get to play it, draw your card due to Jhoira, and then decide if you're going to discard a land or not. Which means in a pinch, you can always just play this and hope you draw a land off the top. If you know what the top card of your library is, like with Sensei's top or the Reality Chip, then you can make it a little safer to cast this card in that way. But the reason you're playing this card is because it's 0 mana, enters, makes a mana, and draws a card with Jhoira. Same here, Mox Opal. Metalcraft, once you get off the ground, Metalcraft is just always there. You're never not going to have Metalcraft once you get off the ground in this deck. Mystic Forge, we talked about this. It's a combo piece with Sensei's top, it is drawing. It's not drawing, but it's generating additional value whenever you're storming because you get to cast them off the top, which is basically just casting a free card that you wouldn't have had already, and then drawing a card off it because of Jhoira. Pyrite Spellbomb, we went over this with Aether Spellbomb, just versatile, does what we want, draws cards if we need it to. Sensei's top, the most broken card in this deck. I've been on record saying I think that our deck is the deck that breaks top more than any other. There might be some modern deck or something like that breaks it more so, but I feel like every combo in this deck, if you put top in it, it just becomes so much more ridiculous. ISO Rev, play top, you immediately draw your entire library. Words of Wind, you play top, you if you have more than 2 mana between 2 other artifacts, you just win the game. Which is something we'll get into a little bit later. I still want to get into the Words of Wind loops and stuff, but those are more intermediate than the simple win the game because you drew your entire library loops. Sensei's top and Mystic Forge, obviously, plus a cost reducer. The only one that it doesn't technically synergize with is Underworld Breach, but even then, drawing additional cards when you have an Underworld Breach on board is definitely going to help your Underworld Breach win you the game, because Underworld Breach likes it when you have a lot of cards. Soul Ring, stupid card. 1 mana for 2 mana, absolutely broken. Not much to say about it, Soul Ring. Another 2 mana for 1 mana. Colored, obviously, for a single damage. Damage doesn't matter. Tormod's Crypt. This is another one of the... It's 0 mana. It does something useful. Exiling cards from a player's graveyard. Turns off your opponent's breaches, hilariously. It also stops your opponents from not letting you mill them if they have a Shuffle Titan, because you just exile the Shuffle Titan in response to it trying to shuffle itself back. And now that Shuffle Titan is in exile, which means it doesn't exist.
Take that, Get Rog.
And that's it for artifacts. Yeah, artifacts are good. We're running 30 plus artifacts if you count the artifact creatures in the deck. They're crazy good. There's not much more to say about it. Anything y'all want to add? While I take a sip of this water from talking for the past 20 minutes.
So we get asked a lot of questions about where to start because we understand that not everyone's going to shell out for $100 Mana Vault, $200 Mana Crypt. Like, there's more than just these that make the deck run. So please, like anybody else watching this later on, this is, of course, the idealized version of the deck. Please don't think that you have to start here. This is just us talking through and illustrating and highlighting what can be done. There are, of course, other avenues to victory, so please don't think we're going to leave those out in the end.
Right. And if you're pro proxy, then yes, this deck is a good place to start. But if you're not, it's perfectly okay to run less powerful cards. Just because the cards are less powerful doesn't mean that the overall deck is going to be not cEDH. You can still keep up at a cEDH pod with a deck that's 10 times cheaper than this deck. Maybe 100 times cheaper. Because I think we're at like 18k thanks to Time Twister. Specifically Time Twister. Because that card's like 14k for some reason. I mean, I know the reason, but you know. Start running through instance. I'll be a little bit quicker with these than the artifacts. The artifacts are the meat and potatoes of this deck. You're going to be running them as much as you can onto the board. And everything else in the deck is kind of meant to prop up those artifacts, to help you get more of them, to help you abuse them in some way. That or protecting you, like in the case of counter spells and removal. Generally protecting you or stopping your opponents from winning the game. So, Abrade, very simple. 2 mana, deal 3 damage to a creature or destroy an artifact. 2 mana to get rid of 2 different things is about the going rate for 2 mana. Unless you're in Golgari, in which case they get 2 mana to destroy anything, but we're not Golgari.
We're not that cool.
We're not that cool. Brain Freeze, combos with Breach. Most of the time you cast Brain Freeze is at the end of your storm, or is at the end of your storm, and because it has storm, I hope you kept count, because if not, well, you're going to be counting every single one of those cards that you played, maybe multiple times if you bounced them once or twice. Brainstorm, 1 mana, draw 3 cards. That's what this card says. The putting 2 cards back on top is not a big deal 95% of the time, because we do play all of our fetches. We play basically every tutor that's halfway decent in this deck.
I do want to pause on this one, if I may. So this is something, this brainstorm, and part of the reason why this is the one of the few cards that I think has survived the great purge of like preordain and ponder and such, is that you get to look at more cards, and then you get to take artifacts that you may not care about right now and put them on top of your deck to fuel things later. Like, a lot of people look at this card and actually look down on it because they're like, well, you're only really netting 1 card. But like Wash just said, there's so much more strategy that goes into Brainstorm than you might first think.
Not to mention, it's also instant speed, so you can do it at an end step. You're not locked into sorcery speed like you are Ponder and Preordain.
Right. Another thing you can do with Brainstorm is if you have the Reality Chip or Mystic Forge on board and they're active, you can put an artifact on top and then play it with Brainstorm, which is basically the same as having it in your hand. You get to shuffle away those 2 cards that you put back, which, if you know anything about the deck thinning argument that is ever present in Magic, it doesn't really matter that you're putting back 2 cards that you don't want to draw again, because the chances of you drawing them again are pretty slim. You're probably not going to see them again if you shuffle them away, unless you draw your entire library, which I guess we are trying to do, but at that point it doesn't really matter. Moving on, Chain of Vapor, actually probably one of the most sleeper cards in this deck. People see Chain of Vapor and they don't realize how dumb it is in this deck. You play Chain of Vapor on one of your own artifacts. 9 times out of 10, I've resolved this card. It's been to bounce something of my own back to my hand, and then sack a land and do it again and do it again and do it again. And I usually bounce 4, 5, 6 things back to my hand that I can then recast. It's much more surgical than something like Retract or Hercule's Recall, because you get to bounce back the things that you actually want to bounce back instead of everything. Like you don't want to bounce a Cloud Key back to your hand most of the time. That's 3 mana. It's
If you're storming, you're not going to be recasting Cloud Key is the point.
right most of the time, unless you bounce back like a Manifold or something. But yes, Cloud Key is hard to get on board. So if you're playing a Chain of Vapor, you just don't bounce the Cloud Key. You bounce the other things. You bounce the Mox Diamond that you tapped. You bounce the Mox Amber. You bounce all the things that are going to get you more mana and are going to get you more cards without compromising your board state. But moving on, we have Psych Rift. People say not to run this card because it can't bounce your own stuff.
Those people are fools.
Yes, that's not why you play this card. I don't care that it doesn't bounce your Dockside. That's not why it's in the deck. If it was in the deck to bounce your Dockside, then you misread the card.
Then it'd be Chain of Vapor.
Yeah. You play this card in your deck as a get out of jail free card. If the game is stacked stout and you have no other way to win the game, this card will bail you out almost every time you cast it. It's instant speed, so you get to wait for that perfect moment. None of your opponents will be expecting it, which is hilarious because it's like the poster child for EDH. Like whenever you resolve one, everyone's like, "What the?" But yeah, this is a board wipe. Just board wipe your opponent and then win. Deflecting Swat, free counter magic basically. It protects you from basically everything, more so than a counterspell in a lot of cases. It won't protect you from like a Vandal Blast, but who's playing Vandal Blast? Most of the time, it's going to be someone trying to blow up your Jhoira or maybe one of your combo pieces on board, and making them have to moving that over to something else that may be problematic for you is obscenely powerful, especially for completely free. Dispel, very simple, no instant spells. Basically anything your opponents cast on your turn is an instant, so very good, just easiest way to say no. Dramatic Reversal, combos with Iso-Rev, we went over this already. Fierce Guardianship, counter any non-creature spell for free. Very, very good. If you have this
Needs
in
a
hand,
foil printing.
if you have this in hand, you basically don't worry about tapping out. Like, maybe keep 1 mana open just to bluff, and then that would be fine. But if you have to tap out and you have Fierce Guardianship in hand, you're generally feeling pretty okay about tapping out. Same with Deflecting Swat. They're both very good at ruining your opponent's day out of nowhere.
Especially since we tend to want to have Jhoira out as early as possible and keep her out. that makes these two spells are free way more often than they are not.
Yes. Unless it's turn 1, most of the time it's completely free to play these cards. Flusterstorm. Have you ever tried paying for one of these after a Jhoira Storm turn? The answer is you don't.
You don't, but it is hilarious to watch somebody else try.
Yes, it is. Unless they play Veil of Summer, then we're sad. But, you know.
Flusterstorm of their own.
Yeah. Flusterstorm basically is an uncounterable counterspell in a lot of cases. Just because you put so many on the stack that it doesn't matter that they have counter magic, because there's just too many Flusterstorms for them to handle. Force of Will, same thing as Fierce Guardianship, but it can also counter creatures, so use it on Winota. If you're playing against Winota and they play Winota, Force of Will to Winota. I don't care how far behind on board they are.
Kill the Winota.
Do not let Winota resolve.
Death to Winota.
Hercules Recall. We talked about this earlier, but bounce all your artifacts. Can also be used offensively. If maybe you're playing against like an Urza player. But that sounds like a bad plan unless it's not their turn. But yeah, bounce all your stuff, draw cards off of all your stuff, re-entering. It's good. We play it for a reason. Mana Drain, a little bit less high on this card recently, but 2 mana counter anything is not a bad rate, and then if you counter an ad nauseum with this, and then it gets back to your turn, 9 times out of 10 you win, because you have so much additional mana for free, just for not losing the game, that you're usually able to just storm off and win right then and there. Can also help recast Jhoira if she's been killed. You can just use this on like some 2 or 3 drop as a way to kind of store up mana for next turn, trying to recast your Jhoira. Versatile, sort of. Just counter whatever you want. Counter the Winota.
Or the rule of law.
Yes, or the rule of law. You can do that too.
In case anyone is wondering, for the sake of the recording, yes, anti-Winota sentiment is strong with this server.
It's a good deck, but God, why does it ruin our deck? Mental Misstep, basically free counter magic. It only hits 1-drops, but a lot of things that we don't like are 1-drops. Nature's Claim, most counter spells that aren't Force of Will.
Plus, never underestimate the joy you get out of misstepping someone's turn 1 Soul Ring or Fish.
Yes. Mental Misstep the Fish. Soul Ring depends on the deck, but Fish always Mental Misstep that turn 1. And then it also counters your opponent's Mental Misstep, which is good whenever they try to Mental Misstep your Sensei's Top. Which, sad days if your opponent's Mental Misstep your Sensei's Top. Don't let them know, though. Don't let them know that you're sad you did that. They did that.
We call those people haters.
Yeah, there is a special circle in hell for those people.
Muddle the Mixture. Counterspell for 2 mana, but the main reason you play it is because it has Transmute for 3.
I was gonna say, don't lie to these people. We don't play it because it's a counter spell.
No,
don't lie to them.
That is not why you play it. You play it because it has Transmute, which lets you go and get any 2-drop Recently, with the printing of
Reality chip?
Reality Chip, it became a tutor for 2/3 of our main combo instead of just 1/3. It also gets Breach, which not a lot of cards in Is It do, so very good there. Also puts itself in the graveyard for the Breach, which is, synergy every card has with Breach. Now I think of it. It goes and gets Riddlesmith, which is your best card advantage engine outside of top. It goes and gets a cost reducer, Ethereum Sculptor if you need to pass the turn after this, or Helm if you're planning to win this turn.
You can also grab Reversal or Ice-Crown Scepter
Yes,
if you have one of those pieces already.
It grabs pieces to every single one of your combos except Words of Wind. Unless you count Grim Monolith as a win condition in Words of Wind, which I guess you could if you have 2 cost reducers on board. But yeah, probably the most versatile tutor in our deck outside of Gamble, just because it goes and gets basically whatever you need all the time. If you need cards, it gets Riddlesmith. If you need mana, it gets a cost reducer. If you need a combo piece, probably get you whatever combo piece you're missing, or it can go and get you a either a transmute artifact or reshape so that you can tutor chain into whatever artifact you need. Very good card. Mystical Tutor. I've actually been less high on this card recently. The main reason you play this card is because you can Mystical Tutor for either a wheel or a bounce spell, put it on top of your library, and then immediately draw it thanks to Jhoira's ability to draw cards. Which can generally win you the game, but the fact that it costs a blue on top of the blue that you're already going to be spending on the card that you're playing, or that you're putting on top, can be a little rough. Double, triple blue sometimes. Doesn't come easily if you're not immediately winning the game, but still very, very good. Usually I go and get Paradoxical Outcome if I have the mana, just because that card wins games. We'll get to it. Pact Negation, free counter magic. Sort of. Just don't get to your next turn if you play it. Or if you do, make sure you have the mana to pay it.
Yeah, this is definitely in the same category as Helm of Awakening. Try not to play it unless you either A, have nothing else you can do, or B, you're about to win.
Yes. The best thing to do is play Pact Negation. Your opponent goes to counter it, and then you counter the original thing again instead of countering their counter to Pact. Because then you don't have to pay for the Pact, because it got countered. If you're able to do that, obviously. But
do not do what I do on the odd occasion and use it turn 1 on someone's mana crypt just to send a point if you want to win the game.
Yeah, don't do that unless you manage to resolve a dark side turn 1 for 5 mana at least.
And for anyone who's wondering, that's why we keep Dark around.
Hey, someone has to be the bad person.
Hey, Paradoxical Outcome. This has basically the best parts of your normal bounce spells with Chain of Vapor, while also just drawing you an insane amount of cards. Most of the time, if you resolve a Paradoxical Outcome, you win the game, because you draw 9, 10, 20 cards, depending on your board. If you have Sensei's Top, have it on board. Don't have it on top. of your library. This is just simple math. If it's on top of your library, then you're going to draw it with the paradoxical outcome, and you're going to play it, which will draw you a card. But you lost a card off of the paradoxical outcome because of that. If you had the top on board instead, then you draw a card off it going to your hand, and you draw a card off it going onto the board. That was something I had to figure out in my own head. Because I was like, where do I want it? Do I put it on top? The answer is no, don't put it on top.
Alright, chances are if you're drawing any like nonsense, any like I'd say 3 or more cards, that you're most likely going to hit an artifact. So
yes, not to mention the fact that all the artifacts that you're putting back onto the board you're drawing.
Yeah.
So yeah, this card usually wins the game on the spot. A lot of times, if no one has interaction for it, they'll just scoop in response because they're not going to sit through you sorting through all the cards that you just drew and figuring out if you have the win or not, or if you have to keep storming.
There's a reason why we call this card the Blue Adnaz in the Discord.
Yes, it is definitely Blue Adnaz.
You will know you've reached legendary status with your Jhoira deck when everyone just sees this, collectively groans, and then wants to throw you out of the closest window.
I've shown people this card in my hand, and without even casting it, and they've scooped. But yeah, insane card. I see why it's banned in other formats. Red Blast, removal and a counter spell. Doesn't hit Winota, which makes me sad.
Lame.
However, it does hit mostly counter spells. There's not a lot of blue permanents that you're trying to blow up. It hits Rhystic Study and it hits Mystic Remora, which are the 2 main ones that you want to blow up. But outside of that, you're not too worried about your opponent's blue permanents, except like maybe a Notion Thief if you're playing against Freeze Thief. But
it was a lot more relevant when Hull Breacher was still legal in the format.
There's a reason we only play this one and not the other one, and it's because 2 copies of this card isn't exactly where we want to be.
Some of us play Pyroblast because we're greedy fucks and have the pretty spellbook Chandra version of the deck. Or card, I should say.
The Chandra one is nice, yes. I agree. However, Red Blast is strictly better in our current meta because Deflecting SWAT exists. And if you Red Blast a blue spell, and in response they go Deflecting SWAT, there's nothing for them to target with the Deflecting SWAT. So they have to keep it on the blue spell on the stack. So strictly better than the other one. Doesn't mean it's as pretty. Resculpt, same thing as a Braid. It exiles, which is more relevant against breach decks because you get to exile their LED. No, you do not.
Death to Winota.
Death to Winota.
Yes, it also murders Winota, but be careful about that because it gives them a 4/4 that triggers whenever they recast their Winota.
That's why we just make sure they never recast Winota.
Yeah, that's when you mana drain it. Retract, same thing as Hercules Recall. We don't need to go over that. It's 1 mana though, so that's nice. Swan Song, basically the best 1 mana counterspell there is. Hits enchantments, and that's relevant because Rule of Law exists, and you won't be happy whenever you see a Rule of Law. Also, just the fact that it is a hard counter. It doesn't ask them to pay X amount, something like Miscast or Fluster Storm, I should say. the 2/2 bird doesn't matter unless I guess you're playing against Winota. I play against that deck too much.
So, man, I did not know we were going to talk bash Winota this much tonight.
And for the record, it's not that I hate Winota players. I just hate Winota. Like, don't misunderstand. I'll never get mad at somebody for playing Winota.
No,
I mean, I may question their personal decisions, but it's fine. But I cannot stand Winota decks. They drive me up a wall.
Yeah.
Like, why would you want the game to go that slow?
Even when I'm playing a deck that is favorable against Winota, I'm still just like, I don't like playing against it. But that's it for instance. Now we're on to creatures. But did anyone have anything to say about the instance? Counter spells, anything like that?
Nothing that hasn't already been said, personally.
Alrighty.
Nope, yep, all good. It's just a little bit of counterspell, tutor, good interaction overall, and yep.
We had one tutor, but yes. We don't have a lot of tutors, actually. So
No, Mystical Tutor and Muddled the Mixture.
You're right, my bad. Mystical Tutor. I was thinking Artifact Tutors.
Who needs tutors when you draw this much?
Yeah, that's the main thing about our deck, is that we are drawing so many cards that we don't need to tutor too often. But when we do, you tutor for top. Starting off strong with the creatures, we've got Burgi, 1/2 God, 1/2 artifact.
Both halves trigger Jhoira.
Yes, both halves trigger Jhoira. Both halves are stupid. Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, can act as a Mystic Forge in a pinch. It can be a little difficult because if you accidentally exile your Dramatic Reversal, now you have to work around that. But for the most part, it's pretty much just another way you can play with top shenanigans. And the front side also plays with top really favorably because every time you cast any spell, not non-creature spell, not artifact spell, any spell, you add a red mana. And it actually doesn't go away as steps and phases end, which is a line I forgot was there until just now.
And just in case anybody needs a meme reference, Burgi go burr.
So, in essence, the front half is kind of a pseudo cross reducer, and the back half is card advantage.
Yes. So
which are...
No, go ahead.
I'll say, which are, as was said earlier, are the two key components to us wanting to storm, so...
Yes. I was planning on playing Harnfell before Burgi got spoiled as the other side of it. And then I read Burgi, and I wished that these were two separate cards. Because then we could play both in our list. But the fact that they're on one card isn't that bad, because, well, you have options. Anytime you draw one of them, you draw both of them.
I mean, there's always the potential to copy with Rex and Metamorph and then play the other half, and then have both.
If you have, like, a Breach on board, because it kills itself to Legendary rule.
Oh, yeah. Well, someday I'll make that. Someday I'll think of a way to make that work.
Just play Sakashima.
No. I tried positioning that before and it got shot down. Just saying.
Look, you can
try harder.
You can copy Jhoira. At that point, it's basically just Vidalcan Aether Mage. But the front half is kind of more broken than the back half because as you're storming with your 0-costed rocks, you're making mana. And if you're playing 1-drops or 2-drops, most of your 2-drops are gonna make mana anyway. Most of them are Most of them are rocks. So add Bergie onto that, and suddenly you're going mana even on them. And add any other cost reducer, and well, you're off to the races. It's so easy to just make 10 mana while you're storming with Bergie on board, to the point that you suddenly just don't care because you have so much mana. You just need more cards. And that's when you bounce Bergie and play her on the other side.
And the fact that she makes red mana has also become more relevant the more that pushed red cards get printed for us too. Because as of lately, we've been seeing a lot more push for red cards than blue cards, I feel like, coming out of WotC for our deck.
Experimental Synthesizer is the most recent edition, and I've been absolutely loving that card. Anytime you combine it with Bergie, it's free, unlike with the other cost reducers where it would still be 1 mana. And yeah, it's just, Bergie's dumb. You'll find a million uses for it. I can't even go over all of them here. Dockside, both the bane and love of our lives.
Card is trash.
That's your hot take. In real life, where the rest of us live, it is definitely one of the better cards in the deck for sure, hands down.
Yes. Even if so, Dockside is a double-edged sword for us. If our opponents play it, we're pretty sad because we just fed them like 7 mana. But if we play it, we make like 5 mana. We usually just win the game right there. Because 5 additional mana for 2 mana is an insane rate, especially when it's any colored mana. You get to bounce it with stuff like Chain of Vapor and Words of Wind. Though if you're doing it with Words of Wind, you should do it first, because after that, all your opponent's artifacts are going to be gone, and enchantments. But play Dockside, make 5 mana, win the game is a pretty common way to play Dockside. Just because once you have 5 additional mana, halfway through your storm, you just usually have the combo pieces in hand to just end it right there, or maybe a tutor to go and get your combo pieces and win. Yeah, dumb card, very good. 2 mana for some reason. This could have been
Especially
fun.
the more that WotC tends to tries to push treasures, which off of the Capenna spoilers seems like a safe bet.
That's true. And tapped treasures now mean that they can't sack them in response to you making treasures, which is interesting. Just something to put out there. Darcy, Dragon Rage Channeler. This is so dumb with Breach. Every spell you cast, you're surveilling one, so you just get to look at the top card, and if you don't like it, you put it in your graveyard. Or if you do like it and you want it in your graveyard, you put it in your graveyard.
And this is the answer to, well, what do I do with all these lands? You surveil them into the graveyard where they fuel Breach and do effectively what they would have been doing on your board in the first place.
That's right. The Delirium doesn't matter. Just attack the person who doesn't have a flying 4/4.
Or is the Ad Naz player. Yes. That should be noted.
Or the Ad Naz player. Or just win the game before you have to attack with it. Which is one of my favorite things to do with this card. I don't know about
you can just win.
But yeah, it goes off of any non-creature, which is different than most of the cards in our deck. So it triggers off things like counter spells, some of our rituals, like the 3-mana one, whose name is escaping me.
The audio cut out for me there. What are we talking about?
Yep, that one.
The 3-mana ritual that exiles 3 off the top, makes red.
Jessica as well?
That one, yes. It'll trigger off Jessica's Will, it'll trigger off stuff like that, but it won't trigger off your artifact creatures. So just something to keep in mind. Don't accidentally surveil after playing an Ethereum Sculptor. Or an Enthusiastic Mechanaut, for that matter. This is the most recent artifact reducer that they've printed. The fact that it's 2 pips in the casting cost, it's a little bit sad, but it's still 2 CMC, so better than Cloud Key.
It's a strong boy.
Yes. It's also a 2/2 with flying.
Which is more relevant than people think.
Yes. I wish it was a 3/2. Then it could block Drake. Ethereum Sculptor, basically the same card. The fact that it's got a 1 in its mana cost instead of another pip is nice, because if you have another cost reducer on board already, this becomes a 1 mana cost reducer. But they're the same card. Phyrexian Metamorph, probably the most versatile card in our deck for obvious reasons. It just enters as a copy of anything. It's 4 mana, but really it's 3 mana, and most of the time it's going to be even less than that, because of our cost reducers. If you've ever played Phantasmal Image, this is Phantasmal Image, but better in our deck, because 1, it draws a card, 2, it can copy artifacts, which you can play this for 2 mana, copy a Mana Vault, get 3 mana back. At that point, it's just Grid Monolith. You can copy a Dockside that maybe you or an opponent played, and make a dumb amount of mana. You can copy a Riddlesmith if you need more card draw. You can copy a Darcy if you need more cards in your graveyard, maybe for a Breach line. It's so versatile. We don't need to play Sculpting Steel because of this card, which is so nice. That card's not that good. It can... it is how we do our Infinite Swans loops. We just copy our ISO-Rev and put Swan Song on it. Then you cast any instant, sorcery, or enchantment, and then just make Infinite Swans. Very good. Riddlesmith, our best card advantage engine, as I've said multiple times, outside of top. It's just 2 mana, 1 time 2 mana, and then it's basically a second Jhoira that also feeds Breach. The fact that you're discarding cards isn't relevant as long as Jhoira's on board, because you're still going even every time that you play an artifact, and you're just discarding all the cards that you're not going to be playing anyway. And if you would play them, you would play them before you played that artifact. So, Riddlesmith, extremely good. The Reality Chip, basically a better Mystic Forge, because it doesn't only play artifacts off the top. You can cast any spell, and you can play lands. The fact that it's 1 more mana to use than Mystic Forge is something of note, as well as the fact that it's 2 blue pips instead of being completely colorless. However, the fact that you're able to split this up to multiple turns is very useful, or even in the same turn. Just you play this early in the turn, and then later in the turn, you end up having enough mana to reconfigure it.
It also provides us with a blocker in a deck where really our utility creatures don't have big butts.
Right. I feel like Jhoira is a pretty good blocker, though. Like, in a lot of cases. She's a 3/3 that blocks most things. It doesn't block, like, Najila, but it blocks Timna, it blocks basically any dork. It blocks basically anything that we need it to block outside of Winota. But this doesn't block Winota either, so...
Yeah.
Praise to the jellyfish gods.
Another thing about this card is that you can just play it for 2 mana, or 1 mana if you have a cost reducer on board, and it just becomes free. Look at the top card of your library, which makes storming a lot easier because now you know what you're going to draw, and you know if you should spend that last mana to draw an additional card or not, instead of just passing with mana open. Makes things a lot cleaner, makes it way easier for you to be able to go off. One thing to note about this card, if you have this card and Sensei's Top, but you're not able to reconfigure it, you're able to tap the top, draw your card, and then see the card that's underneath the card that you just drew before you put top onto the top of your library, which again helps you know if you should keep going. I had to look at that, or I had to ask a judge about that one actually, because I wasn't sure if there was a moment that you could look in between, but any time means any time. And there is a time in between you drawing a card and putting top on top. So, therefore, you're able to look and see what's underneath there. Trinket Mage, 9 times out of 10, this is just get top dot creature. It also gets Mana Crypt. It gets Soul Ring. Gets... What's the other one I'm thinking of?
Mana Vault.
Yes, it gets Mana Vault. Experimental Synthesizer. Because unlike the other card that gets 1 or 0 drops out of your deck, it doesn't say specifically that it needs to have either a mana cost of 0 or 1, like Urza Saga. It just has to have a CMC, or nowadays a mana value of 1 or less. So it does get Experimental Synthesizer, unlike Urza Saga. One thing I've done with this card is bounce it with Words of Wind, and then replayed it to go and get the other mana positive rock that I need to go off with Words of Wind, which is relevant, but you need to have a lot of mana before you do that. You need to have like 4 mana, 5 mana. 5 mana, yes. Urza probably help you get that 5 mana. You draw a card off it, first off. It turns any of your artifacts that aren't already producing mana, things like your Tormod's Crypt, maybe your Jeweled Amulet, Everflowing Chalice, Lotus Petals, so you don't have to sack it. LED, you can still sack that one even after you've tapped it.
Chrome Mox if you've elected not to
yes,
pitch anything to it.
You can play Chrome Mox with this on board and not have to pitch anything and still be able to tap it for mana, which is nice. It also enters with an artifact, so it actually pays for itself a little bit just off the bat. Um, those are the main reasons you play it. It's also an infinite mana outlet, which comes up less often, but is still relevant. If you make infinite mana with ISO Rev and for some reason you don't have Sensei's top, you can just start flipping off the top with Urza and win the game, most likely. And that's it for creatures. We don't play a lot of creatures. The ones that we do are either artifact creatures, because obviously, or are in some way so synergistic with our artifacts that it'd be a crime not to play them. Anything y'all want to say about the creatures in this deck? I need to run to the bathroom, so say what you will. Try not to say anything too. Try not to hit them with anything that's too hot of a take.
So, we make a lot of comparisons to Bergi and Urza. That is something that, when we're talking about the basic tactics, is going to be a pretty straightforward piece. But when we start getting into advanced tactics, is where they differ greatly. So it really does depend on what it is that you're trying to do with the deck. So Urza, for example, is a infinite mana outlet, as is Bergi, but they do, slightly different things. It is worth noting. Um, so yeah, they're not, it's apples and oranges, not apples to apples. So just bear that in mind. And then, of course, fueling everything that we want to do with the deck is crucial. And I know we've spent hours just back and forth about what creatures to consider or what creatures to work with and whatnot. So a lot of thought has gone into the creatures that were selected for the deck. And a lot more thought's going to go in if something comes up for bait, for sure. So just bear that in mind. So this is going to be the part in the video that's definitely going to get edited out when there's these long, drawn, pausing silences because no one's here talking, and it's just me droning on for seemingly no reason.
Well, I mean, I can add stuff in too if you'd like.
Go for it.
I'll say, in my experience, particularly with Urza, it acts more as counterspell bait than anything else because I can count on one hand the number of times the table has allowed me to resolve an Urza, and that's maybe because I usually don't feel the need to fight over an Urza because while the value would be insane and it would kick it would pull ball me even further ahead. Most of the time, it feels more win more than I need this to get ahead. So that's just my personal experience with Urza at the very least.
I would agree. More often than not, people see Urza as this big, mean, scary thing, and their natural impulse is to counter it. You may not be anywhere even close to winning, but they will see that and they'll just be like, no. So agree with you there, Dark. It is excellent bait for trying to draw out and have people waste their counters on something that you may not even care about.
Yeah.
All right, and the only downside of that is since Urza does cost 4 mana, it can be very expensive bait. But I mean, when I've I've run Urza out because I've sorry, I've played games where I've been looping top for extra card draw, and the table has gotten wise to what I was doing, and I've heard people make deals as to who's going to counter my top and whatnot, and I would run Urza out in place of top to draw that counter, and more times, the majority of the time, the table does agree to counter the Urza and let me have my top, which is honestly more central to my game plan than Urza will ever be.
Urza is a value card first and foremost. It is not a central part of your game plan. So yes, I agree with you entirely. If you can get your opponents to bait, if you can bait your opponents into destroying your Urza instead of something like your Jhoira or your top, like you were saying, absolutely do that. Urza is good. It's not how you win most of the time.
One last useful piece on Urza, of course, is that his tap and untapped artifact you control ability is on a creature, and so if someone does have a Null Rod or Collector Ufe ability out, he is one of your solutions. If you're unable to get a removal spell but you have an Urza in hand, you can play him to tap your artifacts for mana.
That's right.
But also keep that in mind if you are running Curse Totem for any reason, as some of us do.
He does not make his thing as he enters. That's correct as well. Something fun you can do with Urza as well. You can actually make infinite colorless construct artifact creature tokens with it. If you make infinite mana with Words of Wind, and you bounce Urza and any other thing that draws you a card, which is hilarious. And I haven't won with it yet, but I hope to someday.
The dream is there.
The dream is there. On to sorceries. I know we don't have a lot of these, but the ones that we do are pretty powerful. First one, Fabricate. Pretty obvious. This 3 mana, get any artifact, put it in your hand. It's the most basic. It's exactly what you want. 3 mana, get anything. That's basically 4 mana top. That's how I see it a lot of the time. Gamble. A lot of people don't like Gamble, and I understand why. Discarding the only land in your hand or the card that you just tutored for can suck. However, a hand never becomes worse for having Gamble in it. That's how I see Gamble. Because you play Gamble and then you go and get the best card in your library for that situation. If you discard the card that you searched for, your hand is not worse than it was before you had that. Before you resolved that Gamble. It is exactly the same. You just have one less Gamble in it. And if you keep the best card in your library, it doesn't matter what else you discarded, because now you have the best card in your library for your situation in your hand. It's a pseudo 1-card win condition with Breach. Depending on how many cards you have in graveyard, it becomes easier or harder to win with it. But if you just play Gamble, go and get Breach, as long as you don't discard the Breach, and you have 1 additional red mana after you play Breach, then you basically just win the game. Gitaxian Probe. It turns our 99 card deck into a 98 card deck.
Wait, you mean Sol Ring didn't do that already?
Well, by that logic, we're playing a 72 card deck?
That's not legal.
The main thing about Gitaxian Probe is that you don't need your commander on board to be able to draw a card with it. So if you need to draw one more card, maybe you put something on top with your maybe put something on top with Mystical Tutor. Maybe you put top on top and you just need an additional card to be able to draw it. This card, just think of it as if it was a 0 mana artifact that said, lose 2 life, look at target player's hand. And you don't need Jhoira to draw a card off it. I play that in this deck. And I don't see why you wouldn't. This deck is just trying to get to its combo pieces as quickly as possible. And Gitaxian Probe is just a free card that, if it wasn't there, it would have to be some different card that could be in the way of you getting closer to your combo. Next, we have Jeska's Will. Probably the second or third most broken ritual. 3 mana and exile the top 3 or make red for each card in your opponent's hand, or both if Jhoira was on board. And since Jhoira was going to be on board 9 times out of 10 that you cast this,
both. You always want both.
You're getting both most of the time.
Greed is the name of the game with this deck.
If you're playing against a Thrasios Tymna deck, more than likely this is going to make 7 mana. Any mid-range deck, honestly, this is going to make 7 mana 9 times out of 10. And you get to exile the top 3. So it becomes 3 mana, draw 3, make 7 mana. Which is insane. There's not much more to say about that. It's exactly what this deck wants. Just make mana, get more cards. That's what every Storm deck wants, honestly. Reshape, Artifact Tutor. It can get expensive if you're trying to get like a Mystic Forge, but 3 mana to put top on board is just fine with me. It's better than Fabricate, and I would not cut Fabricate. 4 mana to go and get ISO Rev if you have Dramatic Reversal in hand, or going and getting Reality Chip for 4 mana again. Even though you still have to reconfigure it, it can still be more useful than Mystical Forge in certain situations. Goes and gets you a cost reducer. Just everything an Artifact Tutor does. Time Twister and pretty much all the wheels, they're just 3 mana, draw 7. Like, some people, a lot of newer players don't like wheels, and in certain decks, I can understand why you don't want wheels. However, this deck, you absolutely want wheels, because 3 mana, draw 7 wins the game in this deck most of the time. This sort of is in line with the other cards like Heaven of Awakening, where you don't usually want to pass after you resolve a wheel. However, if it's early enough in the game, turns 1 and 2, resolving a wheel usually doesn't end the game on the spot if you pass the turn. And obviously, turn 1 wheels are insane. If you see a wheel in your opener, there's a good chance you'll be able to play it turn 1, just because of the sheer amount of fast mana we play in this deck. And unlike Jhoira, where you want to hold some artifacts in your hands until after you play Jhoira, you can just rush all your fast mana onto the board, play a Time Twister, and then draw a new 7. It's not like Jhoira, where you need other cards to make Jhoira do the thing. It's just 3 mana, draw 7. Obviously, wheels are a little bit high risk, high reward. So, do y'all have anything you want to say about them?
I would say another thing about wheels, at least in my experience too, is I'm not on Time Twister, so I can't speak to that one specifically. But sometimes when I'm on probably my 3rd or 4th attempt of going off because someone has stopped me for the other ones, a wheel into breach a wheel can feel your reach lines and can get you there as well. Obviously, it's high risk because you're feeding the table interaction, but if your graveyard is big enough and you keep interaction in there, you can usually outpace anything that you give the table.
Right. Especially because at that point they're relying on free counter magic most of the time. They probably don't have the mana to cast more than one extra counter spell that they draw.
Right.
Anything else about wheels? I know some of us are on them and some of them aren't. I just think that they're absolutely 100% should be played in this deck. All right.
Oh, yeah, they're a strong effect, yeah. Yep. I agree. If they had printed honestly like more, like Wheel of Misfortune was a little hit or miss, but if the Wheel of Misfortune was a little bit more powerful, it might have also seen play alongside the 3 here.
Right. Well, the reason I'm not on 4, I think Wheel of Misfortune is just not exactly as powerful as the rest of them, but still plenty powerful enough to see play. I just don't want too many copies of certain effects in this deck. That's why you only see me playing 3 wheels. That's why you only see me playing 3 bounce spells. 4 if you count Chain of Vapor. But I don't want to oversaturate the deck with these good effects that are only good in contexts. We want them in those contexts, but we don't want too many of them outside of those contexts. So wheels are one of those contextual cards. You need to contextualize it in the game for it to be powerful. Same with our bounce spells. They are great in this deck. However, if you have too many of them, it becomes too much of a good thing, and we all know how that saying goes. Next, we have Transmute Artifact. This is different than other tutor effects. The entirety of this card's effect is the effect. There is no cost to this card. Sacking an artifact is part of the effect. Searching for your artifact is obviously part of the effect. But you don't have to pay the mana until you've chosen what artifact in your deck you're going to get. If you even need to pay any mana, because this is also going to make that spell that you're getting cheaper. Assuming you didn't sack a 0 mana artifact, which sometimes you have to do, but most of the time you sack like a 2 mana rock or something. But because the entirety of this card's effect is in the effect and none of it is part of cost, the only downside of playing this card over something like Reshape is that it's 2 mana. It's just 2 mana, unlike Reshape, which would be 2 mana and X. And you have to sack something. If Transmute Artifact gets countered versus if Reshape gets countered, you lose a lot more from Reshape than you would from Transmute. Wheel of Fortune, Windfall, same as the other wheels. Very good. Windfall. Have to be a little bit careful if you have like 20 cards in hand. You don't want to give all your opponents 20 cards. But if you have 20 cards in hand, you probably win. So, not too big of a deal. That's it for sorceries. Anything y'all want to add about our sorceries?
There are very few, but they're very good.
Yes. You'll notice that there are no sorcery bounce spells. They're all instants for some reason. I'm not complaining because that's just value.
I have a question.
Yes.
How far out of the mana curve would you go for wheels? Say if you didn't have like the Time Twister and Wheel of Time, the high dollar wheels, what would you use in place of those?
I would obviously use Windfall and Wheel of Misfortune. I think both of those are perfectly suitable. Um, I don't think I would go above 3 mana for a wheel. 4 mana, depending on the power of the wheel, you might be able to convince me, but anything above that is a no go. Like, I know Change of Fortune is pretty decent. Discard your hand, draw equal to the number of cards you've discarded this turn, which goes really well with Riddlesmith, but even that one I don't think quite makes it into the list, even in more budget lists. So yeah, it would have to be a pretty strong 4 mana wheel to make it into this deck. Moving on to enchantments. We have fewer enchantments than anything else in this deck, I know. But the first one we'll go to is Mystic Remora. This card's dumb. 1 mana for a most of the time they won't be able to pay the 4 mana, and even if they can, they probably won't. If you play this in our specific deck, you don't usually want to play this turns 1 and 2 unless it's secondary to your main game plan of getting down Jhoira. If you play it turn 1, it's probably because you went like Ancient Tomb, Talisman of Creativity into this. But you're not going land, fish, pass. Because the main game plan of this deck is going to be Jhoira. I've been burned too many times by going land, fish, pass. It's just not worth it most of the time. People aren't going to feed you the additional cards. They know you're a Storm deck. They know you want those additional cards to really get your engines going. But if you play this mid-game, like turn 3, turn 4, it's probably going to stick there until the end of the game.
Wait for a moment.
What's that?
Oh, no. Hey, guys, I'm going to hop out.
Oh, you're all good, man.
All right, yep. I'll catch you guys later.
All right. But yeah, so Mystic Remora, if you play it mid-game, it's very good because it's probably going to stick around till the end of the game, and you're going to be drawing cards off all the counter wars that happen during that time, as well as just your opponents naturally playing the game. If one of your opponents, or if you're trying to win and you have a fish on board, it makes it 10 times harder for your opponents to stop you because you're just drawing additional cards even when they counter your win conditions. On top of the fact that you were already drawing cards off of playing your win conditions, thanks to Jhoira. It's so hard to play around for your opponents unless they're playing Winota. But aside from that, it's just incredibly good. Next, we have Rhystic Study. Basically the same thing as Mystic Remora. You're not going out of your way to play a Rhystic Study until maybe mid or late game. But whenever you do, it just immediately is going to draw you, not immediately, but it's going to generate you so much value over the rest of the game that it's well worth its 3 mana cost. Even if they pay every single time, the fact that you basically just played a Trenosphere, or not a Trenosphere, a Sphere of Resistance, but one-sided, is perfectly reasonable for this mana cost. Next, we have Underworld Breach. This card's insane. Um, it basically wins you the game with like a ham sandwich most of the time. Like you draw Underworld Breach, you probably have the win. Um, like, especially if you wield at any point during the game, um, or you have like one tutor engrave because you already tutored for like a cost reducer. Um, m- Most of the time, you just play Underworld Breach and have a way to win from there. Um, and even if not, even if you're just playing Underworld Breach for value, we do have some artifacts that sacrifice themselves. Think like Conjurer's Bauble. Um, you play the Conjurer's Bauble from your graveyard, draw a card, sack the Conjurer's Bauble, draw another card, and you just went two for. You just drew two cards just for exiling three from your graveyard, which almost pays for itself at that point. And if you have any amount of cards in your graveyard, you're gonna get deep enough to where it doesn't matter, and you just find the win. Oh boy, words of wind. All right, so I guess it suits that this is the last card in the list. Words of Wind goes infinite so easily in this deck with Jhoira on board. Whether you're just bouncing your opponent's entire board, you're making infinite mana with this, you're drawing your entire library with top. It's just ridiculous. So I'm going to go ahead and go through a couple of these lines. But you'll find through just playing the deck, anytime you resolve a Words of Wind, it's probably game over. So the first one is the most obvious and the one that we use it most often for, just clearing the entire board. You play Words of Wind, you pay one into it, and then you play a 0-drop. You now bounce a mana positive rock to your hand, tap whatever you just played for 1 mana, and then play the mana positive rock that you bounced to your hand. Every time you do this, you're going to be bouncing one thing of your opponent's to their hand, which is obviously not good for them. And you get to keep doing this until all your opponent's boards are just completely gone. And there's not really a way to come back from that. Like, maybe if you pass the turn, they go land, fast mana, consult Thassa, but like, that's a pretty specific hand, and you probably have counter spells in hand for that. So most of the time, if you do that, you just win the game. But if you want a more concrete way of winning the game, there's a few other ways to do that with Words of Wind. The first way, you make infinite mana. You just need 2 rocks that are able to produce more than 2 mana between them. Something like a Mox plus a mana crypt. Mana crypt produces 2, and then the Mox produces 1, and they don't cost anything to play. So you use the 2 mana from the crypt to pay for both of them, and then you get 1 free mana out of it from your Mox, which just means that you're able to do that infinitely and create infinite mana. In which case, there's ways to win with that. You can, once you've created infinite mana, there are other ways to win. You can maybe play Codex Shredder and mill your opponents 1 card at a time. You can play Sensei's Top. This is a very interesting line. So the way that this one works is that you play your Sensei's Top. You draw a card off of your Jhoira. Then you pay 1 mana into the Words of Wind. You will now tap your top, and instead of returning to the top of your library, top will return to your hand, where you're then able to recast it again, drawing another card off of Jhoira, pay another one into the Words of Wind, and you're able to just repeat that infinitely until you've drawn your entire library. That's another one of the reasons that top is so broken in this deck. You are able to make infinite ETB triggers for any of your legendary creatures. This doesn't matter for anything except Urza in the current list, but it could be relevant at some point. Yeah, there's a million ways to use Words of Wind, but those are the main ways to be able to win with it. Just getting it to loop 2 artifacts, or 2 historic spells, I suppose. Yeah, it's I consider it a pseudo 1-card win condition with Jhoira, because anytime that you draw it after you've been storming, it basically just finds a way to end the game right there, if you're able to resolve it, because you're gonna have the mana positive rocks on board. You're gonna have maybe 1 or 2 cost reducers, which make it even easier to go off. Yeah. Anything y'all want to say about the enchantments or Words of Wind?
I mean, this card right here, I would argue makes the deck. I think someone was asking earlier in deck help, and they didn't have Words of Wind in their main list, and part of me is just like, what are you doing? Like, ever since Joy was printed, this card was like a 49-cent rare at best,
Mm-hmm.
and a like $4 or $5 foil. I remember because I picked mine up for like $3 or $4 at the bargain, scratch a dead bargain bin,
Right.
and now it's a $40 card
Of course.
for this reason alone.
Right. Well,
Like
it's
if that,
it's a $40 foil. It's a
yeah,
like $6
it's a
card.
$6 card, yeah, but still,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
like if you get Joyra, this is the very first thing I would argue. If you don't own this card, this is the first thing you should buy after Joyra.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
The biggest sleeper card of the deck. Most underrated card of the deck, probably.
Right. It doesn't go in like most other lists, outside of Jhoira, and like Tulane. Some lists play Tulane.
The only deck list otherwise I have seen play it to any remote effect was Tatiova.
Tatiova makes sense as well, since it's any permanent. But then you need a way to make infinite land drops, which you can do in Tatiova. But if you have infinite land drops, then you kind of just go infinite with a ham sandwich in Tatiova. But yeah, that's all the main list outside of lands. The only real lands that are to note in this deck are Otawara, which is basically a bounce spell attached to a land that comes in untapped. Very good. Instantly got put in the list the second it was spoiled. It just it replaced an interaction spot in our list because it's just free interaction in your land base, instead of as a separate card. And then the next 2 lands that are of to note in the deck are Ancient Tomb and Gemstone Caverns. Those 2 function generally the same. The main idea is just that they give you 2 mana on your turn 1, just in lands instead of in other things, which makes certain lines like playing a 2 mana rock on turn 1, so that you can play Jhoira on turn 2 easier, and can do some other things like, let's say you have Mana Crypt in hand. Gemstone Caverns just lets you play turn 1 Jhoira. Or if you have any rock in your hand, like a Mox Diamond with Ancient Tomb, it will let you play any 3-drop on turn 1, which can be anything from Fabricate to Rhystic Study, to Words of Wind if you want to rush it out that quickly. Assuming your opponents don't know how Words of Wind goes stupid in your deck. But yeah. There are more cards here, but I think most of these are pretty obvious what they do in the list. The only card I want to go over is Aetherflux Reservoir. So this is the one that we get the most questions about. We probably should have brought it up earlier in the discussion, honestly. This is the only card that we get so many questions about. Every time someone enters the Discord and sees that we aren't playing Aetherflux, they're just immediately like, why? Have you read the card? And it's like, yes, we have. The reason that we're not playing Aetherflux is that it's a card that wins the game either when we've already won the game because we've drawn our entire library, or it wins the game whenever we're already doing what the deck wants to do. If we are able to gain 150 life through Aetherflux, that means that we drew enough cards during our storm turn and played enough cards that we should have been able to win just from naturally drawing into a different combo. It's 4 mana, which is a lot. 4 mana should win the game in this list, honestly, unless it's refunding itself like Urza. Like with Mystic Forge, it combos incredibly easily with Sensei's Top, as well as acting as a card advantage engine. And then there's Paradoxical Outcome, which just wins the game whenever you resolve it. And that's literally it for 4-drops that we have in the list. You could consider Words of Wind a 4-drop because you have to pay the 1 to get it started whenever it enters. But again, that wins the game. And you could consider the Reality Chip a 5-drop if you really wanted to, but you're able to split that cost up over multiple turns. So all of these cards that are at the same mana value as Aetherflux either win the game by themselves or as a combo, or refund themselves in the case of Urza. So Aetherflux, just as a card, isn't worth playing in the deck because most of the time that you draw it, it's either going to... Sure, it'll win you the game, but if you had just kept going a little bit further, you probably would have been able to win the game anyway. Or you're going to draw it and you're not going to cast it because you don't have the mana. But, yeah. Aetherflux is a good card, and I think you should play it in more budget lists because it does provide a very clean way to end the game. However, in the completely budgetless list, it's just not needed. It ends up taking more away from the deck than it gives. Anything y'all want to say about Aetherflux?
I mean, I completely agree with your sentiments. It does a lot of what we want to do when we should already be winning. There's quite literally no reason at all why you're not winning with something else by the time you could cast Aether Flux and technically storm off with it. In the budgetary lists, it makes sense because it's a $15 card that, under the correct circumstances, will win you the game. Any other time, though, when you're on budget less, or Wisconsin, if you really want to make a good reference, um, you're there's so much more that you can do, and that at that point it just becomes a dead card and takes up a slot. So that's the biggest reason why, and at the level that we play at, we have to be extremely, extremely considerate of what we do and what we utilize. Not everything. Like I get some people are immediately just like, okay, yeah, that deserves the top spot. Does it though? Like, does it really do the things that you want it to do, or does it just look good on paper? Sadly, Aether Flux is what looks good on paper, not in practice.
I agree. And I've seen some people play Thassa's Oracle in this deck as a way to win after you've drawn your entire library. Please don't do that. Play Aether Flux before you play Thassa's Oracle, and don't play Aether Flux um, unless you're restricted by budget in some way. Um, but Thassa's Oracle, um, unlike Aether Flux, has no inherent synergy with the deck um, outside of devotion, I suppose. Um, and it only wins you the game after you've already won the game. If you draw your entire library, you have a way to win in your hand already. You don't need Thassa's Oracle as a dead card in your hand, or in your library, I should say. But yeah, um, I think that's everything I wanted to go over. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Why it's a considering card. Um, they are either meta cards in the case of cards like Pongify, Chaos Warp, um, Displacement Wave, budgetary cards like Wheel of Misfortune, um, War of Invention, or just do something in some way that other cards don't do. Um, for example, Gilded Drake, Simian Spirit Guide, Shimmer Mirror, those are all effects that other cards don't have. And even though I don't personally think they go in this deck, you might disagree because of their uniqueness. In which case, go ahead, run them, and tell me how it goes. I love being proven wrong because it just makes the deck better. Um, and even though most of the time it seems like I have a pretty decent idea of how good a card is, I've been proven wrong on multiple occasions about cards that I've considered not good. Um, so I have no problem at all if you think a card is good and you want to prove it to me. One other thing I will bring up, we aren't playing Urza Saga, and we aren't playing Artifact Lands. The Artifact Lands are pretty easy to explain why we're not playing them. Whenever we play a bounce spell, we actually end up bouncing them back to our hands. And on top of that, whenever we're up against Artifact Hate, they just become a liability. Because they end up getting either blown up or shut off by things like Oof and Stony Silence and Null Rod. Not Stony Silence. The other one. It might be Stony Silence. I don't remember. But they end up just being more of a liability than a help. We only have one Metalcraft card in the deck, which is Mox Opal. So the amount of artifacts that you have on board really doesn't matter. They also feed Dockside, which, again, you don't want to feed Dockside more than you already are. Urza Saga. The reason we don't play Urza Saga is it's too slow. And you're never playing it as your turn 1 or 2 drop land. And the reason for that is that on turn 1, you are playing a land and some sort of fast mana. Either Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Mana Vault. You're playing those on turn 1. And the land that you want to use whenever you play that, you want to have a colored land on board. Because if you have a colorless land on board, then turn 2, you're not going to have the 2 colors that you need to play Jhoira. You're going to have a colorless land, and then a colorless artifact, and then 1 land that produces colored mana, which means you won't be able to play your commander on turn 2, which is what this deck wants to do. So on turns 1 and 2, you're not playing Urza Saga. And if you play Urza Saga on turn 3, you have to wait until turn 5 to be able to get the 0 or 1 drop. And by turn 5, you should already have the 1 drop that you want out of your deck, which is Sensei's Top. And you should probably have you want to have won the game by turn 3 and 4. If you get to turn 5, then yes, Urza Saga is fine, but it's not what you want to aim for. And it also still takes away from your colored mana. Even though you're playing it on turn 3, now you have 1 less colored land that you could have played for another blue source or another red source. Instead, you're just putting down another colorless source, which we already have enough of in Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, Grim Monolith. All of them are already making colorless mana. The last thing I want to say about it is that it's to Battlefield, which for everything except for top is a negative because you don't get to draw off that card entering like you would if you had cast it, because it's going straight from battlefield it's going straight from deck to battlefield. You're never casting it and you're never drawing a card off it. So yeah, there's my rant about Urza Saga. If anyone wants to say anything about Urza Saga.
I mean, your rant pretty much covers it, but the time limited didn't listen. It's too slow. Mm-hmm. It does not do the things that we want to do, mm-hmm. So we don't run it.
I agree. This was all stuff that was written down for different reasons. This was written by Nate. He says, helping in today's discussion should help our deck become more powerful by taking the time and joining the discussion. You helped to do your part to make the Jhoira Weatherlight cEDH primer the best it can be. Thank you for all your notes and points, guys. Here's to future games. May our storm count be the fall of our enemies. And obviously, Nate, you said that anyone can ping you or me to get a copy of this PowerPoint if they want it.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. I throughout the whole PowerPoint, there was the pros and cons sections. I basically was filling in each card and writing down some of our notes that we would say for each card.
I gotcha.
So if you'd like that version, or if you'd like the original, you can DM myself or Wash. We can provide that for you as well.
Alrighty. And we can go through all of these cards and put them into All-Stars, perhaps, if we'd like to. I'm thinking we might want to do that at a different time, because I know that a fair number of us weren't able to make it today. Olardell, I think Dark just left. Yeah, he left a few minutes ago. As well as a few other people who said they wanted to join. I know Green Mage probably wanted to. Paradoxical, probably. Psychotic. They all probably wanted to join in, so we can probably go over that a different time. This right here, but I do want to go over a little bit of mulligans with this list. So we can go ahead and pull up my main primer list. So let's head right down here. Oh, no, I passed it. There it is. Okay, so we'll go over a couple mulligans. I don't want to go over too many because this video's already gone for quite a while at this point. 2.5 hours, in fact. Now that I'm looking at it. So I don't want to take too much more time. But I do want to go over some mulligans since this has kind of become a introduction video instead of a deck building primer like we had kind of intended when I first
well, someone had to sit here and talk about every single card in great detail.
I mean, there's a lot to say about the deck. I could keep talking for another 2.5 hours if I wanted to, just about individual cards, but we can go over hands now. This hand I would not keep. There's no turn 1 or 2 Jhoira here, unless you get really lucky off the top. This is a very slow hand. There's no turn 1 play here, and turn 2 you probably play like Riddlesmith, Pass, or Grim Monolith if you want turn 3 Jhoira, but turn 3 Jhoira is not a line that we go for in this deck.
To put it in terms that some people may understand, no! No!
Don't keep this slow of a hand. This hand is a little bit better, but still not one that I would keep. There's not a lot of gas in this hand outside of Experimental Synthesizer. And Paradoxical Outcome, you generally don't want to see in your opening hand unless the rest of it is complete gas, because it's going to sit in your hand for turns and turns and turns, until like turn 4 whenever you're storming. And by that point, you've already gotten so many cards on board that this card didn't help you get there. Retract, obviously, again, works similarly, but with Chrome Mox here, I'm not huge on it because you would have to exile another card to Chrome Mox, and we're already not getting Jhoira down turn 2, so it's just not worth keeping this hand.
It looks good, but no.
It was so close.
Well, the fact there's no lands in it is already a problem.
It was like one land away.
It was one land away from being so keepable.
Land, Soaring, Felwar Stone, Jeweled Loaded.
Yeah.
Or actually, probably not that, because you wanted to play Jhoira and then get the...
Right. I would have gone land, Jeweled Lotus, Jhoira into Jeweled Amulet, and then next turn gone Soul Ring, Felwar Stone, or maybe Soul Ring, Cloud Key, Felwar Stone, if we have the mana for that.
Or actually, maybe even Darcy then.
Oh,
Soul
yeah,
Ring.
Darcy. Yeah.
But one land. Replace the Isochron with a land, and I'm there all day.
Yeah, but this was 6, and we're not keeping this, so we're going to 5. One thing that that I want to get out of the way about this deck, Don't be afraid to mull to 4. I've done it plenty of times, and I've won plenty of times off of doing it. This deck is greedy, greedy, greedy. You need to be greedy if you want this deck to function the way that it's made to function.
Aggressively mulling is also what we call it. You have to want it. Like, if
Yes.
you're not comfortable mulling down to 4, don't take this the wrong way. Please pick another deck to play.
This hand at 5 is a very easy keep. I want to say I bottom the prismatic and the, I'd say the recall. It's a toss up. It's a toss
I
up.
was gonna say it's totally a toss between Recall, Transmute, and Tormod's Crypt.
Right. The fact that we
and
have,
I would say in that order.
right. The fact that we have Crypt and Crypt. The fact that we have Tormod's Crypt and Mana Crypt makes me want to keep the recall more than I would most of the time in these kinds of hand, because we go turn 1, land Crypt into unfortunately nothing turn 1, but turn 2 we play Jhoira, and then we play the Tormod's Crypt. We draw a card, and then turn 3 we're able to play the recall, bouncing both of these to our hand, and then replaying them to draw 2 additional cards, which is obviously a very good way to go if we only draw lands off the top. However, we run 26 lands in this deck, so it's not likely that we're going to draw only lands off the top. And if we draw anything else relevant, then Transmute Artifact looks a lot better, because if we get like a cost reducer, we immediately just sack the Tormod's Crypt and go and get top. And now that we have a cost reducer in top, we're able to just make so much more value than Hercule's Recall would. So it's a toss-up here. I'd probably keep the Transmute and ship the Recall, but the Recall is the safe option in this hand. So if you want to bottom the Transmute, I would not blame you for that. But good 5. I wish it was 6, but that's always how it is. So first 7.
Oh. Oh.
It's an interesting hand. So there's only 1 land.
That's a spicy meatball, sir.
So we go turn 1, get probe off immediately into Mana Confluence, Jeweled Lotus into our commander. Rushing out our commander turn 1 with only a 2-drop to play is risky. However, we have the card that we drew for turn, the card that we get off Get Probe, and then the next card that we draw to either get a 1 or 0 drop or a land.
I was going to say, the thing that's probably some people might be listening to this and going, why are they rushing it so hard? It's because we have Words of Wind in hand.
Yes, we do.
We have Words of Wind and we have a cost reducer.
Yes,
and we have most of a whole bunch of combos right here.
Yeah,
Mystic Forge, Enthusiastic, and the Transmute.
Yes, so we have Mystic Forge, a cost reducer, and Transmute Artifact, which if we are able to get mana off the top, either another land or more rocks to be able to feed into Jhoira, it's so easy for us to go off with Words of Wind, and if that doesn't work out, then we immediately just pivot into go find top with Enthusiastic Mechanaut, and just start drawing until we get enough mana to be able to slam down the Forge and then go from there. This is I would keep this hand, as risky as it is, because I don't actually think it's that risky. I think you have like an 80% chance to get something relevant. But that's just a spitball number, and I have no math to back me up on that. But yes, great 7. Snap.
By the way, any math nerds out there listening to this, we could really use your help with some probability equations on the Discord. Just saying.
It'd be nice. So let's go ahead and see the next hand. Ooh, spicy. So there's only one land in this hand again. However, we have the windfall. So the worst line for this hand is land, Soul Ring, turn 2 windfall. That is the worst line. If we draw a land in the top 2, then we go land. We go land, Soul Ring, land turn 2 for Jhoira. Now we have the Fierce Guardianship turned on. Turn 3, we play the Fish and the Fabricate. We go and get top or a cost reducer or whatever we want, really. And we're able to go from there while we have the windfall as a backup later in the turn as we're trying to storm more. Because, again, depending what we get off the top, any of these could be relevant. As for whether or not this is a keep, I've been burned by hoping for a second land off the top 2. However, the fact that we have the backup windfall turn 2, it makes us more likely to keep this hand under the assumption that we're not playing against turbo decks. Because a turbo deck will vomit its hand turned 1, and then you're giving it extra cards with windfall, which is a very easy way to lose the game. So this is a pod dependent hand. In a more mid-range game, I would keep this hand. If there's like 2 mid-range players and a turbo player, I might keep this hand. It all just depends on pod composition. But for the sake of argument, let's say we're not keeping this hand. We will go to our second 7. This is not keepable. You're not doing anything. There's no acceleration. There's only 1 land, so you're not even getting a turn 2 Riddlesmith. This is not a keepable hand.
Why do I feel like we just talked about this hand? I feel like we just talked about this very hand.
Yes.
No, it's actually very different.
It's a bit different. So, the main thing about this hand is that there's not a windfall. There's not a wheel in it. So I don't think I would keep this hand. This is a 6, by the way. So even though we go and get Volcanic Island, play Soul Ring, turn 2, we could play the Experimental Synthesizer and hope we get something off the top, like a land. But at that point, we're waiting for a turn 3 Jhoira if we didn't get a land off the top. So this hand I wouldn't keep because it's very close. If it had 1 more land, it'd be an easy keep. But in our specific case, I could not keep this hand.
Like a land instead of recall?
Yeah, a land instead of recall. Maybe Muddle the Mixture. I'd be okay with losing Muddle the Mixture for a land. Just because we're not able to cast it to the double blue. We would be able to cast Recall after the Experimental Synthesizer. Like we go land, Experimental Synthesizer, hope for a land on the top, and then if we don't get it, we use the land to, I guess, retract in this case. But we would bounce the Experimental Synthesizer, get another card off the top, hope that it's a land. And then the next turn we'd be able to play Experimental Synthesizer again. and then bounce it with the recall. But at that point, we're just not going anywhere. So this hand is not keepable. So we'll go to 5. This is also not keepable. Well, hang on. So earlier we said that this was against a more turbo pod. Because we didn't keep our first hand under the assumption that it was a turbo pod. So if we're assuming a turbo pod still, and we're expecting our opponents to go land, rock, something, then fish looks a lot more appetizing. Because you could draw like 4 or 5 cards before your next turn in the right pod. So given the situation that we put ourselves in by not keeping that first hand, I would be okay with this hand. I would bottom Urza and probably Resculpt. Keep the more gas and interactive parts of this hand in case we need to. Like, if we get something to go off with Underworld Breach, the pact just keeps us safe the entire time. Because we pact, and then it goes to graveyard, and then we can reuse the pact every time that it gets countered, assuming we have enough cards in graveyard, which if we're drawing enough cards off fish, then we're discarding cards into our graveyard. So this is a very risky hand, but given the situation that we put ourselves in, I would keep this hand. So let's go for one more round, and then I think we can call this quits. How's that sound, y'all?
Do it.
All right. So let's see. I would not keep this hand. The obvious line is turn 1, Spire Bluff, hold up Dispel, turn 2, Riddlesmith, turn 3, hope that you got enough for Wheel of Fortune, or Rhystic Study, I suppose. But there's no acceleration here. There's obviously no turn 1 or 2 Jhoira, so it's not worth it. One of these cards didn't change. Ooh. So this definitely depends on pod composition. Dockside here can make you no treasures turn 2, or it can make you 6 treasures turn 2. And depending on which one of those it's going to do is whether or not you keep this hand. So turn 1, you go, turn 0, you gemstone, probably the Dispel away. Maybe the Force of Will, but probably the Dispel. And then turn 1, you go land, top, and then hold open a mana to make it look like you have interaction. Because why else would you put the Dispel away and hold 1 mana open turn 1 if you have a Dispel? And then at the end of your next opponent's turn, spin the top, putting another land on top. Getting the land, playing it, doing Dockside, hoping you get like 6 mana. And then from there you have 7 mana. You go Commander, tap top, put top on top, play Bergie, draw the top, and then go from there. So this is definitely a turbo hand if your opponents are playing turbo. If not, you ship it. This is not going anywhere if you don't make a lot of mana off Dockside. What do y'all think? Because I know I just talked about this like a decent amount, like how I would go with this hand.
The only other thing would be if you're not, of course, turn 1, because we want the Gemstone Caverns online. If your opponent is able to incredibly do like their turbo on turn 1, your Gemstone Caverns turn 0, then you play the other land on a Confluence on your turn 1, and then you can immediately dockside, depending on how many treasures that can make you.
That's true
But
as
more than
well.
likely than not, then yeah, you play the Senseis, then hold the mana open, do the Scry effect to get the mana open on turn 2, because the dockside will make the treasures on top of the extra land that's still open. And Bergi and Sensei's Divining Top is already 2/3 of the combo. If you're able to get Reality Chip or Mystic Forge out, you're able to win the game on the spot.
Right. I like this hand.
But yeah, the only hand that I would probably not keep this against is if it was super heavy, like if it's like Animar, Winota, and like Atlet table.
Najila.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like everything is going to be very high stacks. But against even mid range, this could probably be pretty good, because usually everyone is looking to play some kind of an enchantment or artifact on turn
Right. You
1.
could probably, like, most pods expect like 4 mana off dockside turn 2. We're assuming we're not going first because we have the Gemstone Caverns.
Correct. Yeah, if we are going first, then I would pitch this hand.
Yes,
probably.
this hand is immediate pitch if we're going first. But since we're not in first, assumedly, the Gemstone, that means that someone's going to be playing. At least one person is going to be ahead of us, which means that they get 2 turns to develop, which is obviously great for our dockside if they're not playing Dorks turn 1 and 2. So there's that as well. But let's say we're going first. Why not? Just so we can see a couple more hands.
Yeah, we would go down to 6 in this case.
I would not keep this. This gets shipped. Only 1 land again. We're getting a lot of 1-landers that I would still keep. Or wouldn't keep, I guess. I suppose in this case I wouldn't keep, but yeah, no. This isn't going anywhere. The Lotus Petal looks nice until you realize it only goes into a Felwar Stone, and then you're like, maybe not. Alright, so this is 5.
Oof.
I would also not keep this. I'd be happy going to 4. There's just not enough gas in this hand. There's, again, just the Lotus Petal. We got Phyrexia Metamorph again, hilariously. But you can't rely on Phyrexia Metamorph to get you out of the situation, unless, like, maybe one of your opponents is on Urza or something. But even then, like, I probably wouldn't keep this hand. Yeah, so ship that away. Oh, boy. Just top deck the land. And then go zoom, right? And you bottom Pyrite and Cloud Key, top deck the land. This was 4 though, so that's unfortunate. There are 3s that are better than this 4. Hoping to top deck a land is the easiest way for you not to play the game. So sometimes aggressively mulling will burn you. In this case, this is one of those cases where it seems like we're getting burned pretty aggressively. However, it's just part of playing this deck sometimes. So I guess we're going to 3. Oh boy.
I think
so. At 3, right? How about 2? No, I'm just kidding. So obviously we have to keep this. We're still in a situation where we're hoping for the top, for a land. However, what we're bottoming here is probably the Felwar Stone, the Fierce Guardianship, the Helm of Awakening, and then either Time Twister or Rhystic Study. Time Twister is a bit safer to keep because it will draw you 7 unless it gets countered. while Rhystic Study will only draw you however much you think that the table is going to draw you into. But considering the fact that you have 0 cards in hand, I don't think people are going to pay for your Rhystic Study. However, I would probably keep Time Twister and bottom the Rhystic Study. So this hand would be Talisman, Gemstone, Time Twister. Again, you're hoping to draw a land, but in this situation, at least you have a mana in case you draw like a Soul Ring or something. Ready for a new 7? I know I said the last one was going to be the last, but I kind of want one.
That one, yeah, I was gonna say that one was not the greatest, so let's send it.
Oh. All right, snap keep. We're done,
There
boys.
There we go. Yeah, that's it. Land. I would say hold the Mana Crypt because we can't play anything off of it. So you just play a land pass. Turn 2, play a land.
Hope to
Mana
top deck
Crypt.
the Jeweled Lotus.
Yeah, Jhoira T Crypt. Then
unless you're worried about someone turn
wheeling.
1 wheeling. Yes. I actually the playing with power game that just happened recently. I remember I was watching the game, and turn 1, the guy goes land, rock, rock. And I was like, you shouldn't have done that. And then immediately after, someone wheels, and I was like, well, I guess you should have done that.
Well, I guess one funny thing you could do, actually, with this hand specifically, play Prismatic Vista and then Mana Crypt. If someone plays something that's worth countering, you can do Swan Song, but if someone if they somehow do like a turn 1 Aetherflux Reservoir, you could actually play Deflecting Swat for a hard cast.
Yes, you could hard cast Deflecting Swat if you need to with this hand. Which is pretty funny. That might be a reason, I suppose. Or someone like turn 1 peer into the abyss. You go Deflecting Swat and just laugh all the way to the bank.
But that would be basically
that would be beautiful.
A person, if you think you need Deflecting Swat. If you don't need Deflecting Swat, then just play the island and then wait for, play the Prismatic Vista still so you can filter. But
right.
Hold it open for Swan Song, then instead.
I think I play the island because Prismatic Vista is a shuffle effect, which if we get top later, if we get the jellyfish reality chip, if we get
sure
brainstorm. If we get brainstorm, then I think having this one is just better. But again, playing Prismatic Vista turn 1 into Mana Crypt and hoping to murder someone's peer into the abyss is hilarious. We're not going first this game. Or we might not. Never mind. That was the last hand. But like, if we're not going first, it's possible someone like turn 2 peers into the abyss and then we Deflecting Swat, right?
I actually think I might actually do the Prismatic Mana Crypt just because of the Deflecting Swat possibility.
Right.
I was gonna say, there's an awful lot of hoping and praying going on over there.
Well, yeah, obviously that's like Christmas Wonderland, but
because what you could do as well is even just not even crack the Prismatic Vista until your next turn. You play the island and then crack the Prismatic Vista if you need it. If you somehow draw like another fast mana and you want to play Jhoira that way, then you can save the shuffle effect for later.
Right.
If you like really need it.
Yeah. Well, you don't. Most of the time, it's better just to use the mana. But like
for the mana.
But like if you go like turn 1 island and then turn 2 you draw like some dual land, you can hold the Prismatic Vista.
Yep. But no, that's a spicy hand. That's a keep right away. 2 interaction spells, 2 lands, Mana Crypt to keep the Jhoira, Deflecting Swat to protect the Jhoira, and a T Crypt to start the draw off on a good start.
Yeah, and I know you said it was like you're hoping for a lot there with the Deflecting Swat, but like you can always just Swan Song whatever someone's trying to do turn 2, turn 1. Like the Deflecting Swat is just like Christmas Wonderland if they try to peer into the abyss, but like if they like even if they just add Nas, you have a way to stop it with the Swan Song.
Yeah, that's why I just love the hand. It's like mental misstep if they do something light, swan song if they try to do something heavy, and then deflecting swat if they do something very specific.
Right. Like if they go like turn one fish, you're just like mental misstep. No. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good one to end this video on. What do y'all think?
That's a good one. Yep.
Sounds good.
It's a good show that this deck can be a little risky. It's known to be kind of in that, while it is a little bit more mid-range nowadays, it is still kind of, it's got its glass cannon roots there in it where sometimes you mull down to 3 and it's going to be a rough game. You're going to have to power through it, but you're going to get these games here where you start with the 2 lands, Mana Crypt, 3 interaction, Tormod's Crypt, where you get to just do that amazing turn 1 or turn 2 play out, and your friends are like, what are you doing? And it just gets to feel super fun. And if that's what you like is that storm out play, then I highly recommend you look into the cEDH database on our the Mox field. You can get, I think, the link to the Discord and join up if you're looking into the video past that. And for everyone here, if you ever have any questions, feel free to message in any of the channels. We're always all open to talking about it for anyone that doesn't talk in the channels often.
Yeah. I love talking about this deck. I'm sure you all noticed. I talked a lot about this deck, and I could keep going, like for another 2-3 hours. But yeah. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and bye bye.